this is James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting May the 4th, 2020. And as I say the date, it reminds me of May the 4th being May the Force Be With You Day from Star Wars. So if you are a Star Wars fan, May the Force be with you, right? So I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's Oracle Outlook video reading. I am so happy to have you here. And while I'm acknowledging that, I want to take a moment to welcome all the new subscribers. Over the last few weeks, I've had a number of new subscribers. So if you are new to the channel, I want to say welcome and thank you so much for taking that step to subscribe. It means the world to me when you would create a little bit of space in your life for me and the content on my channel. So thank you all new subscribers, but as I always say at this point, whether you are a subscriber or you are a regular viewer and you tune in regularly or consistently, I want to thank you for just creating space for me in your life. It means the world to me, and I appreciate each and every one of you and your encouragement and support that you give both to me as a person and a content creator and the channel itself. So thank you one and all. Okay. So for this week's Oracle Outlook video reading, I am honoring the request of a viewer. Last week I had said I had run out of requests, and so I thought I was going to have to resort to or resume going back to, tuning in and feeling led and guided to whichever deck or deck system I was going to work with for the week ahead. And so as soon as I said that, 2 people sent me requests for deck systems that they wanted to work with. So I'm taking them in the order that I received them. So first up this week is Natalia. And Natalia asked me if I would be willing to work with Tarot de Marseille. She was very specific. Not just Tarot, but Tarot de Marseille, which is a particular school or system within the collective Tarot energy or the system itself, right? So I had been thinking about the idea that it had been a while since I used Tarot last, and so when Natalia sent her request, I thought that's a no-brainer because I had Tarot on the mind anyway. She just made it very easy for me as to which system to pick from. So with that in mind, Natalia, this is for you, and the deck I'm specifically working with is one of my favorite Tarot de Marseille decks, and that is the CBD Tarot de Marseille. It is by the late Dr. Yoav Ben-Dov, and so CBD stands for Conver, that's the style or the tradition of Tarot de Marseille, and then BD is for Ben-Dov. The deck is now published by US Game Systems Incorporated, so I always like to throw that in there if you're wanting to look for the deck. So again, I'm working with the CBD or Conver Ben-Dov Tarot de Marseille, published by US Game Systems Incorporated, and now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and see what the Tarot de Marseille wants to share with us about the week ahead. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the deck. And as I do for every reading, I'm setting the intention for the information, for the insight, for any possible guidance and advice to come through the cards that's going to be most helpful and beneficial as we move through the experiences of the upcoming week. So when that happens, when the cards act like they don't want to go back together, that's usually my tell that I'm done shuffling. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. Fan out the cards. And I'm looking for 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention because I'm continuing to do my line of 5 readings. And once again, I'm noticing that all the cards seem to be on the right side of the fan. Alright, so those are my 5 cards. I'm going to take the remainder of the deck up, and I'm going to move that to one side. Now I'm going to line the 5 cards up because I can clearly see I have 5 cards. I don't need to do my check. So I'm just going to line them up in the order that they were pulled. Right. And so when I work with a line of 5, even when I use Tarot de Marseille, I like to look at the middle card. For me, the middle card represents the central issue or the focus for the week ahead. And taking a look at this card, we have Judgment. So Judgment is a major arcana card, so it carries more weight in a reading when it appears. And I have to say, personally, Judgment is one of my favorite cards. So Judgment as a point of focus is a card that suggests time of making a major decision of some kind. I call this the executive decision, or using our executive decision ability or faculty. This is like a judgment call, so the idea, like, you have to use your judgment, use discernment, things of that nature. So if we're being faced with decisions this week, we're being asked to use our judgment and also our discernment, and saying to, like, it may be down, or it may come down to, a judgment call, right? So there is that. Judgment is a very spiritual card for me, and so I tend to look at it as an awakening, right? So it could be that we are going to be experiencing some kind of awakening or a wake-up call. I'm looking at the angel blowing the trumpet, and the people are waking up to the sound, and actually one of the people is actually looking at the angel. So this is about, a call, or responding to a call, or heeding the call, that kind of thing. But I'm looking at it as a sense of a wake-up call, because the people are actually rising up out of coffins. So that symbolically could represent, waking up to some kind of limitation or restriction, or moving beyond some kind of limitation and restriction. So now if I put that into context in what we're experiencing as a collective, this could be the emergence or the re-emergence back into the world, and that would be the places where people are experiencing re-emerging into the world, like the economy that I talked about last week, certain states. And I'm here in the United States, so I can only speak from that perspective, is that certain states are, starting the process of getting businesses up and running again. People are coming out into social venues, social places again, and they're doing it slowly. And I'm thinking that may be where the wake-up call comes in. People have to realize at this point that, we just can't go back to the way things were. There have to be some measures taken to re-emerge out into the world again. So I'm seeing that with judgment. And so judgment, going back to what I first said about it, is about using our wisdom, using our judgment, exercising our judgment, those kinds of things, right? So again, judgment could represent decision making, using our ability to judge wisely, meaning discernment. It could also be an awakening or a wake-up call, and heeding that call. And it could also be a re-emergence into the world, like breathing new life into a situation, or being given a second chance at life, right? Now, when I'm working with this card, I look at the banner, and the banner has a symbol of a cross on it. And so sometimes in some depictions, I consider this to be like the American Red Cross. So for me, this could be issues around healing. And so this would be like people who are being given a second chance at life. So it could just be, aside from the whole coronavirus situation, there are other types of healing that people could be experiencing. And it's like at the end of the experience, on the other side of the experience, it could be like the feeling of, I'm being given a second chance at life, right? And so with that in mind, if you feel like you're in a process of rebirth or getting a second chance at life, the message of this card is, what are you willing to do with this chance that you have been given, right? For some people in a spiritual context, where I talked about this idea about, an awakening or, a wake-up call, that kind of thing, sometimes judgment for me can represent, being faced with the idea or sitting with the question of what either the purpose is of an experience or what your life purpose is, and you're moving into trying to discover what either the purpose of the experience was or what your life purpose is, what you're called to do at this point in time, right? So either one or the other could be also playing at work or having a hand in the matter, quote unquote, in the experience, right? Judgment, the last thing I will say about it is it can emerge when we are getting a lesson of a testing period, right? For me, this is akin to like going to school and being faced with a test or an examination, and you're being in a position of taking the test and seeing whether you have passed the test or not. So that could be in the literal sense, but with schools not being, up and running in the traditional sense or in the conventional sense, and again, I'm talking from the experience of being here in the United States, then I'm seeing this more as a metaphorical thing. Like we're going through a testing period, and now maybe we're being faced with the possibility of needing to consider whether or not we are passing the test. There are angels that I subscribe to this card. One is Archangel Gabriel, because of the trumpet, right? And Archangel Gabriel is the chief messenger angel. So with that in mind, the question could be, metaphorically speaking, are we getting the message, right? Another angel that I subscribe to this is Archangel Jeremiah, who is the angel of life review. Again, it's the same thing. Jeremiah comes to my mind when we are in a process of needing to review a situation. Review is a pun for looking at the situation again, right? And it could be looking at the situation again with a fresh pair of eyes or with a different mindset or attitude, right? So, but it's also with the idea of reviewing something, it's about reflection and also reconsideration. Those are the things that I usually ascribe to Archangel Jeremiah. And then the last angel I would put with this is Archangel Azrael, who assists us during times of change and transition. Archangel Azrael is said to assist people moving from this world into the spirit world. And so that could be the visual of the people rising up out of the coffins, right? So again, Gabriel, Jeremiah, and Azrael. So on that note, I will move on to the card opening the line up on the far left. And here we have, so this makes sense. Here we have the Ace of Coins. And so aces for me in tarot represent a beginning or a start or the potential for the future, which would make sense if we go with the idea that judgment is talking about an awakening or a second chance at life, those kinds of things. Then this would make sense, right? This would be coins is the suit that represents the physical and material world and physical and material resources. So here we have maybe a beginning or a fresh start or a new phase regarding material concerns, and that would make sense with what we talked about in last week's reading with the idea about, financial responsibility and Congress, again, me being here in the United States, doing its part in helping people with economic and financial challenges and difficulties, right? This card here for me can sometimes represent, a windfall of money or money coming in, because it would represent a new source of income or a new resource. And then the Ace of Coins for me can also be a card that talks about a letter. It's known as the letter. And so it could represent written forms of communication, documentation, paperwork, and it might be written communications of a financial nature or about a financial matter, or if I put all of that together, written communication about potential sources of income or new resources, right? Now, another thing with the Ace of Coins is that this, for me, is known as a ring. And so this could represent an engagement. So if we're in the process of engaging back out into the material world, this re-emergence, right? And the slow re-emergence, right? So that would be, limited engagement, right? Again, going with the idea that we cannot return to life the way we were living it in these times of coronavirus or COVID-19, right? So I'm seeing that both of these cards are talking about the slow re-emergence into the material world, right? And especially with this card being about limited engagement, I'm seeing the words limited engagement, right? We can engage with the material world or get back out into the world, but it's going to be a slow process, right? And for me, coins is one of the slower suits in terms of activity, right? So it's slowly engaging back into the process of life, right? So that's what I'm seeing with the Ace of Coins. But usually for me, it usually talks about new sources of income or potential resources for the future. So that's Ace of Coins. And so now I'm going to look at the card in between the two. Ooh, and so here we have the Ace of Swords. So the first thing that I notice is we have two aces, right? So here we have, again, this idea about something new, the beginning of something, a fresh start, those kinds of things, potential for the future, again, because that's all the meanings that I have for the ace. Now, this particular ace talks about a decision needing to be made, right? So I love the order of the cards because didn't I say here, one of the meanings that I have for judgment is about, an executive decision being made or using your judgment or making a judgment call. That would make sense with the order of the cards, right? So if we run the story as I've been talking about the cards to this point, here we have starting or re-engaging with the material world. There has to be some decisions made about that, and then the result is taking action on those decisions. Or if we're faced with a decision, this is the mind and needing to make a decision, it's about using our judgment and using our discernment. Now, if I go to the mind, back to this card being about the mind, then here we have, maybe the possibility of an idea, because I'm looking at the hand holding the sword, and this could be an idea, but an idea that's being handed to us, meaning we're being gifted with an idea. So sometimes it could be about an aha, a big idea, an epiphany, a revelation. The pun here for me with the crown could represent the crown chakra, right? But this could also be clarity of mind, or a thought or an idea that leads to success, triumph, victory, because I tend to look at this as a crowning achievement. So there's that. So this is again for me about the mind needing to make a decision or clarity of mind. Sometimes because the suit of swords can represent problems, challenges, and difficulties, this might be the answer, receiving the answer or solution to a problem, challenge, or difficulty that we've been experiencing. So I'm seeing that with the cards here, but I'm seeing like being faced with the decision, being handed the answer or solution, and then needing to take action on the decision. Like once you make the decision, then what's the action that you're going to take? But I'm seeing this as answers, solutions to the challenge of re-emerging back into the world. So that's what I'm seeing with these three cards. So now let's take a look and see what's on the other side of Judgment. And the card closest to it, we have the Queen of Swords. So the first thing that I notice now is that we have a sword card on one side of Judgment and a sword card on the other. So there are two things to keep in mind when we pull court cards, at least I should say when I pull court cards in tarot. First thing is that the Queen can represent an actual person, right? So this would be a woman, because when I work with Tarot de Marseille, specifically, all queens in the deck represent women. So this could be a woman who is in a position of leadership. And I'm playing on the word reign on the card. Reign is a pun for R-E-I-G-N, reign, right? And so, a queen's reign, right? So this could be somebody who's in a position of authority. and she is looking at this situation, right? She's facing judgment. Oh, and as I said the word, so this could be a woman who's facing judgment, and in that sense, it would be, judgment, criticism, that kind of thing, maybe for a decision that she has made. If I mirror the cards, right? A decision that she's made, and she's facing judgment for that, right? It could also be that she is in a position of leadership and she is looking at or needing to make decisions about or needing to use her judgment, meaning discernment, about how people can come back out into the world. So this would be maybe a particular governor. Again, I'm talking about my position in the world. I'm here in the United States, so this could be somebody who is a female head of state, so that would be a female governor, and she's looking at that. The one that comes to my mind right now, because she is facing problems or challenges, is the governor in Michigan. And so those who follow the news may be aware that that particular governor is facing a lot of criticism for how she is handling the coronavirus stay-at-home orders, those kinds of things in her particular state, right? And there was, over the past week, I'm filming this on Saturday, May the 2nd, so in the course of the week, there was a protest in her state that was brought to her doorstep, so to speak. I know it was in one of the local buildings where people were protesting about her decisions about the stay-at-home orders and things of that. And so people were up in arms, so to speak. Yeah, people actually were brandishing weapons, right, at that protest. So she's facing a lot of challenges with her constituents in terms of how they are reacting and responding to her executive orders, her decision-making ability, things like that. So it could be more along the lines of her, but if not her specifically, then some other woman who's in a position of leadership may be facing some kind of judgment, maybe for how she's handling a situation, or that she's going to be facing needing to make a decision and needing to use judgment and discernment in the process. So there is that to consider. It could also be, if we're not making it about the whole situation with the coronavirus or COVID-19, then this could just be a woman who is facing a decision in her own personal life, and she needs to make her mind up about a particular experience. And it could be that what will help her make up her mind is if the situation is repetitive in nature, because judgment in that case could represent an issue that maybe the person thought was dead and buried, that's metaphorically speaking, and it has now come back up, and she's in a position of thinking or feeling or asking herself, I thought I was done with the situation, and here it is again for me to take a look at, right? And so it could be that for her, she has to make the decision on either one of two things. Either she's being asked to handle the situation as she did in the previous experience, or that she's being asked to look at it and respond to it differently this time to kind of resolve it once and for all. There's that. And the last thing I will say, judgment for me can represent divorce. And I'm saying that for a reason, because the Queen of Swords can represent a woman who is divorced, widowed, or separated. So it could be a woman who is looking at or facing divorce. So that could be an actual divorce or actual separation process, meaning like we're in a couple or a partnered situation and we are removing ourselves from that, right? So that is the literal, like a woman who is actually facing separation or divorce. And if that's the case, then what is she going to do with that, right? And facing maybe a new life and needing to maybe financially take care of herself, because we have two aces here. So aces represent independence, right? So what is she going to do moving forward, because she's facing all the other cards, right? So there's that to consider. Now, if I go with the idea that the Queen of Swords is talking about each of us metaphorically speaking, or more of an abstract quality or nature, then this card is asking us, what would we be willing to cut out of our lives What would we be willing to remove ourselves from? What would we be willing to divorce ourselves from that is no longer serving us or supporting us, right? And that would be judgment, right? Maybe we've learned the lesson, we've gotten the message, right? Or we are overcoming some sort of difficulty, or we're getting to the other side of whatever that test or challenge is, and we're seeing that we need to cut things out of our lives that are no longer serving and supporting ourselves. And then the cards are asking us, with the Ace of Swords and Judgment being the more like revelation or aha moment or an epiphany, like we may receive some realization about what we need to remove. And then the question becomes, will we be willing, if I can get the words out, to do that elimination process, right? So that's what I'm seeing with the Queen of Swords. And so now the final card is the Knight of Batons. And so this is a card that represents, for me, transition or progress, simply because the Cavalier or the Knight is on a horse. And so for me, that represents transition, it represents movement, it represents progress. Now, the interesting thing, if I note the chemistry between the two figures on the cards, here we have the Queen who's looking to the left, and in some circles with Tarot de Marseille readers, the left can represent the past. So here we have maybe a woman who is preoccupied with the past, right? But we can also say the same for the Knight, because he's looking behind him. So for me, this card can sometimes come up when we are going one way in life, and then we stop and pause and maybe take some time to consider if we are going in the right direction or not, because he's looking behind him. He's looking back at where he's come from, right? So again, we have that symbolically, that whole idea about reviewing the past, right? Which I said about judgment, right? Judgment is a card about review, being willing to look at the past maybe in a different way. But it can sometimes represent, like, have we actually, moved beyond the past? Are we willing to put the past in the rear view mirror, right? Again, because he's looking behind him. And he's looking behind him with his wand up, right? And so this could be like some kind of defense, like I'm keeping my guard up, or I'm protecting myself from the past, right? I'm wanting to protect myself from the past so I don't experience that again, right? It makes me feel like maybe being even somewhat defensive about our position, right? It could even be that he's defending the Queen, right? Because she can't see what's behind her, but he can. So it could just represent, being in a position where we're feeling the need to defend our past, as we're trying to move forward. And that would be possibly, when we've done something in our past and we're wanting to move beyond it, and then we have people around us, because batons or wands for me is the suit that can represent the public or something of a social nature. And so we're wanting to move beyond our past. And that would be judgment too, right? Wanting to rise above it, wanting to kind of transition away from that. And we have people around us who always seem to want to remind us of our past, right? And every time they do that, what they're really doing is trying to keep us in the past, right? Usually that's a way of identifying, or an identity thing. Like, people identify us solely based on our past, right? And they're not wanting to take a moment to consider the person that we are trying to become, or that we're in the process of becoming, right? So that may be one of the things that we may need to release and let go this week, are the people who are not wanting us to move beyond our past. And will we be willing to maybe either have a conversation about that, or if we're feeling like I don't want to have a conversation about that, simply just being willing to not, entertain the conversation, saying like, well, that's who I used to be and that's no longer who I am. And so I'm moving beyond that, kind of thing. But I'm seeing like, not entertaining that kind of thinking, or those ideas, or those verbal expressions, right? But if we go with the maybe more spiritual or metaphysical aspect of that, it could be like, maybe you have to ask yourself, is there a part of me that believes what they say to be true? right? Is there a part of me that's holding on to my past and not moving forward? And then the person who's showing up is just giving me an opportunity to reflect on that, right? And then judgment, going with that, is about being willing to move beyond either your own perceived limitations or restrictions. The box would represent the box that we have chosen to put ourselves in, or the limitations and restrictions imposed on other people, right? Meaning like other people are putting us in a box and that's the only way they see us, right? So I went really large at the beginning of this reading and I went to the other side of the spectrum and I made this really personal. So it could be, as I'm wrapping this up, on a more personal level, we're being asked to take a look at where we are, how we identify, you know, it's an identity kind of thing. And especially if we are hanging on to the past, what would we be willing, if I can get the words out again, this week to move beyond that? You know, and that could be either we do it for ourselves or we do it in the context of relationships with other people who seem to want to keep us in our past, right? And again, this is about moving forward. Now, going back to, as I wrap this up, going back to the point where I started, if this is about the coronavirus as a collective experience, then this is about, again, moving forward, but also taking a look at the back, you know, at the past. What did we learn as we move forward? Now, he's cautiously moving forward, right? So this could just be, again, about how can we cautiously move back into the world or the lives that we were experiencing before COVID-19 showed up, right? This card is making me feel like we just can't rush into things. We have to be either cautious or methodical in our approach. And so I'm going to offer that last piece of information that I just said. You know, how can we be cautious and methodical in our approach? So that could be in the larger sense, but also in the personal sense. And on that note, I will go ahead and end this week's Oracle Outlook reading here. I am James Himm Mitchell, and as I wrap up, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's video reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I am hoping that you have the best day possible, and I'm hoping that you have the best week possible. Take care.